Picture yourself standing at the gates of Uruk, one of humanity's first true cities in ancient Mesopotamia. The year is 4000 BCE, and before you stretches something unprecedented in human history. Massive walls of sun-baked brick rise toward the sky. Great temples tower above a sea of closely packed houses. The streets pulse with life as thousands of people go about their daily tasks. This remarkable place began as a simple farming village, but now it has transformed into something entirely new. The change happened because of one crucial development. Farmers learned to produce more food than they needed to survive. This surplus of food changed everything. Watch as farmers bring their harvests through the city gates. Long lines of workers carry baskets filled with barley and wheat. In the city's great storage buildings, thousands of clay vessels hold grain that will feed not just farmers, but craftsmen, priests, and rulers. This surplus of food has freed many people from the daily work of farming. For the first time in human history, large numbers of people can devote themselves to other tasks. The archaeological record shows us this profound transformation. At sites like Uruk and Ur, we find whole districts dedicated to specialized crafts. Pottery kilns cluster together their remains, telling us of full-time artisans. Metalworking areas show signs of sophisticated techniques passed down through generations. These weren't part-time craftsmen, but specialists who devoted their lives to mastering their trades. This was the beginning of urban civilization. These first cities were more than just bigger villages. They were entirely new forms of human organization. The surplus food from farming made it all possible. When everyone didn't need to farm, many could become artisans, traders, priests, or rulers. Society could become more complex, more specialized, more extraordinary. Picture yourself walking through the streets of Mohenjo-Daro in the ancient Indus Valley. This remarkable city shows us how early humans mastered the art of urban planning. The streets form perfect grids running north to south and east to west. Every intersection is carefully planned. Every building has its proper place. This was not random growth, but deliberate design on a scale never seen before. The city planners of Mohenjo-Daro created something revolutionary. They built the world's first known urban sanitation system. Beneath the streets runs a complex network of drains and sewers lined with waterproof brick. Every house connects to this system. Even the smallest homes have private toilets and bathing areas. The engineering skill required for this system would not be matched for thousands of years. Walk with me to the Great Bath, the crown jewel of Mohenjo-Daro. This massive public structure measures 39 feet long and 23 feet deep. Its walls are made waterproof with carefully laid bitumen. A complex system of drains allows it to be emptied and cleaned. This was not just a practical structure, but a symbol of architectural achievement and civic pride. The builders of these first cities developed remarkable new technologies. They created standardized bricks that fit together perfectly. They invented new tools for construction. They learned how to build tall structures that could support great weight. Their architects understood complex principles of engineering, even though they had no written mathematics. In Mesopotamia, we find the birth of monumental architecture. The ziggurats of Ur and Uruk rose in steps toward the sky. These massive structures required millions of bricks and thousands of workers to build. They represented not just engineering skill, but new levels of social organization. No single family or clan could build such monuments. They required the coordinated effort of entire cities. The homes of ordinary people tell us equally fascinating stories. In Ur, we find courtyard houses built to deal with the hot climate. Their thick walls kept out the heat. Their central courtyards provided light and air circulation. These weren't just shelters, but carefully designed living spaces that made urban life possible in a challenging environment. Storage buildings became increasingly sophisticated. The granaries of Mohenjo-Daro feature raised floors and air ducts to keep grain dry and fresh. Loading platforms allow efficient filling and emptying. These structures tell us of minds that understood complex problems of food preservation and distribution. Markets and workshops were strategically placed throughout these cities. Pottery kilns were located downwind to keep smoke away from living areas. Metalworking shops clustered near the city gates where they had easy access to fuel and raw materials. This careful organization shows sophisticated understanding of urban dynamics. The builders of these first cities faced unprecedented challenges. How do you provide clean water for thousands of people living close together? How do you dispose of waste? How do you protect against fire and flood? How do you store and distribute food? Their solutions to these problems would influence urban planning for millennia to come. These early city planners were creating more than buildings and streets. They were creating new ways of living. Their work made it possible for large numbers of people to live together in close proximity. They were inventing urban civilization itself. Every modern city owes something to their innovations and insights. Stand in the bustling marketplace of ancient Ur, watching as traders from distant lands gather to exchange their goods. The year is 3500 BCE, and before you unfolds one of humanity's greatest innovations, the birth of organized commerce. Merchants from the Indus Valley bring precious stones. Traders from the Persian Gulf offer gleaming pearls. Agents from distant mining regions display glittering copper and tin. These early cities became centers of trade on a scale never seen before. The archaeological evidence tells an amazing story. We find lapis lazuli from Afghanistan in the tombs of Ur. Cedar wood from Lebanon appears in temples of Egypt. Cotton from India makes its way to markets in Mesopotamia. These weren't simple exchanges but complex trading networks spanning thousands of miles. The need to track these trades led to revolutionary developments. Watch as merchants in the markets of Uruk use small clay tokens to count their goods. These simple objects would eventually lead to something extraordinary: the invention of writing. Each token represented specific items: a cone for a measure of grain, a sphere for a jar of oil, a cylinder for a flock of sheep. In the temples and palaces, we find evidence of the world's first accounting systems. Clay tablets record detailed inventories of goods entering and leaving storage. Lists document rations distributed to workers. Contracts specify terms of trade agreements. These weren't just records, but the beginnings of economic organization. The development of standardized weights and measures transformed trade. In markets across the ancient world, we find identical weight stones and measuring vessels. A merchant from Ur could trade confidently in distant cities, knowing that his measures would be understood. This standardization made complex trade networks possible. Watch as copper is weighed in the marketplace using a sophisticated balance scale. See how grain is measured in standardized vessels. Observe as scribes carefully record each transaction. This wasn't just commerce, but the development of economic systems that would shape human society forever. The growth of trade created new social roles. Professional merchants emerged who specialized in organizing long-distance exchange. Scribes developed expertise in recording transactions. Administrators arose to manage the movement of goods. These weren't just jobs, but new forms of economic specialization. Ships began to sail regular trade routes along rivers and coastlines. Caravans established fixed paths across deserts and mountains. Way stations appeared at regular intervals. These weren't random developments, but the creation of the world's first international trade networks. The need to protect valuable trade goods led to new developments in security. Cities built strong walls and appointed guards. Merchants developed sealed containers for goods in transit. Temples provided secure storage for valuable items. These innovations made long-distance trade safer and more reliable. Most remarkably, we find evidence of credit and contracts. Clay tablets record loans of silver and grain. Documents specify interest rates and repayment terms. Seals authenticate important agreements. These weren't just business dealings, but the beginnings of financial systems that still influence our world today. These early trading systems did more than move goods between cities. They spread ideas, technologies, and innovations across the ancient world. New inventions could travel thousands of miles. Better methods of farming, craft production, and construction could spread rapidly through trade networks. This wasn't just commerce, but the creation of the first global exchange of knowledge and innovation. Step into the temple complex of ancient Uruk, where one of humanity's greatest inventions is taking shape. The year is 3200 BCE, and in small chambers scribes are pressing reed styluses into soft clay, creating marks that will change the world forever. This is the birth of writing, the invention that will transform human society. Watch as a scribe carefully forms the first pictographs. Each symbol represents a specific object or idea. A star shape for the heavens, a head shape for a person, a wave pattern for water. These weren't just pictures, but the beginnings of written communication. Each mark carried meaning that could be understood by others who knew the system. In the temple archives, we find thousands of clay tablets. They tell us how writing evolved from simple pictures to more complex symbols. The earliest tablets show basic records of grain and livestock. But over time, the system grows more sophisticated. Scribes develop ways to represent not just things but ideas, not just objects but actions. The development of cuneiform writing was revolutionary. By pressing a wedge-shaped stylus into clay, scribes could make complex combinations of marks. This system could record not just business transactions, but stories, prayers, laws, and poetry. This wasn't just record-keeping, but the beginning of literature itself. Enter the scribal schools, where young apprentices learn their craft. Row after row of practice tablets show them copying the same signs again and again. They learn not just how to make the marks, but how to compose documents, how to record quantities, how to describe events, how to preserve knowledge for future generations. The impact of writing spread far beyond the scribal schools. Rulers could now send written commands to distant provinces. Merchants could record complex business deals. Priests could preserve sacred texts. Knowledge could be stored and transmitted with unprecedented accuracy. This wasn't just a new technology, but a transformation in how humans preserved and shared information. See how writing changes as it spreads to different regions. In Egypt, hieroglyphs develop their own distinctive style. In the Indus Valley, a different script emerges. In China, characters begin to take shape. Each culture adapts the idea of writing to its own needs, creating unique systems that would influence their regions for millennia. The materials of writing tell their own fascinating story. Clay tablets in Mesopotamia, papyrus scrolls in Egypt, bronze vessels in China. Each society found its own solutions for recording and preserving information. These weren't just practical choices, but adaptations that shaped how writing developed in each region. Most remarkably, writing began to preserve human thought in new ways. Mathematical calculations could be recorded and checked. Medical treatments could be described in detail. Astronomical observations could be preserved for future study. This wasn't just record-keeping, but the beginning of systematic human knowledge. Writing created new forms of power and authority. Those who could read and write gained special status in society. Written laws carried more weight than spoken ones. Written records could settle disputes and establish ownership rights. This wasn't just a practical skill, but a force that would reshape human society. The invention of writing marks one of the great turning points in human history. It allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations. It made possible new forms of social organization. It created new ways of thinking about and preserving human experience. This was more than just a new technology. It was the beginning of recorded human history itself. Walk with me into the palace of Ur-Nammu, king of Ur, around 2100 BCE. Here in the Grand Audience Chamber, one of history's first law codes is being written. Scribes carefully press cuneiform signs into clay tablets, recording rules that will govern thousands of people. This is the birth of written law and organized government. Watch as officials bring disputes before the king's judges. Every case follows careful procedures. Witnesses testify under oath. Evidence is examined. Decisions are recorded in detail. These weren't just court cases, but the beginnings of formal legal systems. Each judgment sets precedents for future cases. The archaeological evidence shows us how early governments developed. Administrative buildings grow larger and more complex. Storage rooms fill with records of taxes, tribute, and legal decisions. Special seals mark official documents. These weren't just buildings, but centers of political power that controlled entire regions. Enter the world of early bureaucracy. Tax collectors track the harvest yields of every field. Census takers count households and workers. Harbor masters record every ship entering and leaving the ports. This wasn't just administration, but the creation of systematic government organization. The laws themselves tell fascinating stories. The Code of Ur-Nammu sets fixed prices for basic goods and services. It establishes standard weights and measures. It defines penalties for crimes. It protects property rights. These weren't just rules, but the framework for an ordered society. See how early rulers legitimized their power. They claimed divine approval from the gods. They built magnificent palaces and temples. They recorded their achievements in detailed inscriptions. They created ceremonies and rituals of kingship. This wasn't just politics, but the establishment of systematic authority. The organization of labor becomes more sophisticated. Palace records show workers assigned to specific tasks. Ration lists detail payment in grain and other goods. Supervisors track attendance and productivity. These weren't just work assignments, but the beginnings of organized labor management. Most remarkably, we find evidence of diplomatic relations between cities and kingdoms. Letters between rulers discuss treaties and alliances. Records detail diplomatic marriages and exchanges of gifts. Ambassadors carry messages between courts. These weren't just communications, but the beginnings of international relations. The management of resources reaches new levels of sophistication. Surveys map agricultural land. Censuses count livestock. Inventories track stored goods. These weren't just records but tools for planning and controlling the resources of entire kingdoms. Watch as tax collectors make their rounds. They assess fields, measure grain, and collect portions for the palace. Their records are detailed and precise. Every transaction is documented. This wasn't just taxation, but the development of systematic public finance. The rise of organized government changed human society forever. It made possible projects requiring massive coordination. It created systems for resolving disputes. It established frameworks for trade and commerce. This wasn't just administration, but the creation of civilization as we know it. Stand with me at the crossroads of ancient civilizations where ideas and innovations flow between great centers of power. The year is 2000 BCE, and we are witnessing one of the most remarkable periods of human advancement. Knowledge spreads across vast networks connecting Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and beyond. Watch as innovations travel along trade routes. A new type of bronze alloy developed in Mesopotamia appears in workshops thousands of miles away. Pottery styles from the Indus Valley influence craftsmen in distant cities. Building techniques from Egypt transform architecture in foreign lands. These weren't just exchanges of goods, but the spread of technology and knowledge. The archaeological record shows us this remarkable process. Similar tools appear across vast regions. Identical manufacturing techniques emerge in distant cities. Architectural styles spread across continents. These weren't random similarities, but evidence of systematic sharing of knowledge and innovation. Enter the workshops of master craftsmen, where apprentices from foreign lands learn new techniques. Watch as they master skills to take back to their homelands. See how innovations in one field lead to advances in others. This wasn't just learning, but the creation of international networks of technical knowledge. The spread of writing systems transforms communication. Cuneiform script adapts to write multiple languages. Trading centers develop translation specialists. Diplomatic letters flow between distant courts. These weren't just messages, but bridges between cultures and civilizations. Most remarkably, we find evidence of mathematical and astronomical knowledge spreading between civilizations. Similar calendar systems appear in different regions. Mathematical problems are solved using identical methods. Star observations are recorded using comparable systems. This wasn't just shared information, but the development of universal scientific understanding. Religious ideas and practices show fascinating patterns of exchange. Gods from one culture appear in the pantheons of others. Ritual practices spread across regions. Sacred symbols are adopted and adapted. These weren't just beliefs, but evidence of deep cultural connections and exchanges. Watch as agricultural innovations transform farming across continents. New crops spread from their places of origin. Irrigation techniques travel along trade routes. Methods of food storage and preservation pass between cultures. This wasn't just farming, but the sharing of survival knowledge that enhanced life everywhere. The exchange of goods creates new forms of wealth and power. Luxury items from distant lands become symbols of status. Trade in raw materials drives technological innovation. Economic systems become more complex and interconnected. These weren't just commercial exchanges, but forces reshaping society itself. Urban planning and architecture show clear signs of cultural borrowing. Cities thousands of miles apart develop similar solutions to common problems. Building techniques spread across regions. Public spaces show common patterns of organization. This wasn't just construction, but the sharing of ideas about how to build better human environments. This period of exchange and innovation laid the foundation for all future human advancement. It showed how shared knowledge could drive progress, how connections between cultures could benefit everyone, how innovations could transform societies across vast distances. This wasn't just change, but the beginning of globalization itself. The story of these first civilizations is our story. Their achievements became our inheritance. Their innovations shaped our world. Their struggles and successes still echo in our cities, our laws, our technologies. This wasn't just history, but the birth of our modern world.